My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is this. I am 54 years old, and 3 hours before I sat down to record this, I watched my husband of 30 years stand in front of every person I love and announce that he was leaving me for my own stepsister. She's 25. She's pregnant. And by the time this story is over, you're going to hear his voice crack in a courthouse hallway like glass under a hammer. But before we get there, comment below and tell me what city you're tuning in from right now. I read every single one, and honestly, tonight, I need the company. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Now let's go back. Let's go back to the moment before everything I thought I knew turned to ash in my hands. For hours earlier, my life still made sense. The late afternoon sun was pouring gold through the bay windows of the house I'd lived in for 2 decades, catching on the pink and silver streamers we'd hung the night before. The whole downstairs smelled like buttercream and fresh mowed grass drifting in from the yard, where a rented entertainer in an oversized rainbow wig was twisting balloons into giraffes for a pack of sugar-drunk 4-year-olds. It was my daughter Nora's birthday. Her 4th. And her laugh, that high, bell-like, unguarded laugh, was, in that moment, the only sound in the world that mattered to me. I can still see her exactly as she was. Frosting smeared across one cheek like war paint, eyes huge and glassy with wonder, watching a green balloon twist itself into something that was allegedly a dinosaur. I didn't know it yet, but I was memorizing that image. Some part of me, some quiet, animal part, must have sensed that everything after this moment would be different, because I was holding on to it the way you hold on to a life raft. Across the room, my husband, I'll call him Daniel, because saying his real name still makes my jaw tighten, stood near the sliding door in a shirt I had literally ironed that morning. Crisp. Composed. The picture of a devoted father soaking in his little girl's big day. He caught me watching him and gave me a wink, easy and warm, the same wink he'd been giving me since we were 24 years old. And God help me, I still felt that same stupid flutter in my chest. 30 years. 30 years of building something with this man, and I still felt it. Near him, laughing a little too loudly at something he'd said, stood my stepsister. 25 years old, hair the same honey blonde as her late mother's. When my father remarried a decade ago, I welcomed her in without a second thought. She was 17 then, a scared, grieving kid who'd just buried her mom. I paid for parts of her college tuition out of my own pocket. I gave her a room in our home every summer. I let my daughter call her Auntie. She wasn't just family by paperwork. I made her family by choice. That choice was about to become the most expensive mistake of my life. Daniel picked up a champagne flute and tapped it once, twice, with a fork. The room quieted the way rooms do when someone important is about to speak, parents mid-conversation trailing off, a couple of dads setting down their beers, my little Nora abandoning her butterfly chase to look up at her father with pure, trusting adoration. "Thank you all for coming," he said, and his voice had that same easy, practiced warmth he used in every toast he'd ever given. "It means the world to celebrate our girl today." His eyes moved across the room. They skated right past me. They skated right past Nora, the actual birthday girl. And they landed and stayed on her. She stepped forward. There was a strange little curl at the corner of her mouth, something between shy and triumphant. And she rested one hand flat against her stomach in a gesture I'd seen from 100 pregnant women over the years, but never once expected to see aimed at me like a blade. And then Daniel said the sentence that split my life cleanly into a before and an after. "We actually have something else to celebrate today. Chloe and I are starting a new chapter together. She's carrying my son." I want you to sit with that silence for a second, because I had to live inside it in real time. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. It was every ounce of oxygen getting sucked out of a room full of 50 people at once. Somewhere behind me, a kid dropped a juice box, and the little purple stain spreading into the cream carpet was, for several long seconds, the only thing in that room that dared to move. Then I felt it, 50 pairs of eyes swinging toward me like searchlights. Shock. Pity. That awful, hungry curiosity people can't help when they're watching someone else's life detonate in real time. It hit me like a physical blow, like someone had reached into my chest and yanked. My knees actually buckled, just slightly, just enough that only I would ever know. But here's the thing nobody in that room understood yet. On the outside, I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. Because the truth is, and I promise you, we're getting to why, I already knew. I looked past my stunned friends, past my husband's smug, defiant little chin lift, and I looked directly at her. At Chloe. And she was smirking. An actual, unmistakable smirk, standing there with her hand on her belly like she'd just won something. Something inside me went very, very quiet. Not loud. Not dramatic. Quiet and cold and absolutely final. The part of me that spent 30 years smoothing things over, making excuses, shrinking myself so everyone else could feel comfortable, that part simply stopped breathing. I set my half-eaten slice of birthday cake down on the table. I smoothed the front of my dress with hands that, to my own shock, were not shaking. Not even a little. And I walked, heels clicking against the hardwood, steady as a metronome, past 50 frozen guests, toward the entryway table where my handbag sat waiting. Inside it was a plain, cream-colored envelope. Inside that envelope was the end of his world. I turned around. Daniel was watching me now, his triumphant little performance curdling into something closer to confusion. Chloe's smirk had already started to slip. I crossed the room, envelope in hand, and stopped directly in front of the man I had loved since I was practically a child myself. I looked him dead in the eyes. The whole room held its breath, waiting for tears, waiting for a scream, waiting for the scene they thought they were about to get. They were about to be very, very disappointed. I smiled, thin, sharp, nowhere near my eyes, and held the envelope out to him. But to really understand why my hands weren't shaking, why I'd already gone somewhere colder than shock, you need to understand the 30 years that build up to this exact second. 1. Comment it if you're still with me. I want to know you made it this far, because it only gets heavier from here. 30 years. That's not a phrase. That's basically my entire adult life measured out in one man. We met in college. He was the dreamer, big talk, bigger plans, a smile that could talk a bank teller out of an overdraft fee. I was the practical one. The finance major who balanced our checkbook down to the penny and made sure his dreams had an actual foundation under them instead of just air. When his first business venture collapsed, I was the one waitressing double shifts to keep our lights on. When he wanted to walk away from a stable job to find himself, I was the one quietly tightening our budget so we never once missed a mortgage payment. I put my own dream, my own consulting firm, on a shelf labeled later. Later, after Daniel gets settled. Later, after the kids are older. We struggled with infertility for years, and when our miracle finally arrived, my daughter, Nora, born when I was 50 years old, my own ambitions slid even further into the background. She became my entire universe. I didn't mind. I want to be clear about that. I never minded. Then there was Chloe. My father remarried when she was a teenager, freshly orphaned by her mother's early death. I looked at that grieving kid and saw someone who needed exactly what I had extra of: patience, resources, a spare room, an open door. I paid for pieces of her education out of my own inheritance. She's family, I told Daniel. He'd smiled that easy smile and said, "You have such a good heart, Ellie." I didn't know yet that my good heart was about to be the first thing sacrificed. The unraveling didn't announce itself. It crept in sideways, the way rot always does. It started 3 months before that birthday party, with a single line on our joint credit card statement: $500 at a jewelry boutique in a mountain town we hadn't visited together in over a year. When I asked Daniel about it, he barely glanced up from his phone. Must be a glitch. I'll call them. He never did. So I did. The charge was real. That was the first loose thread, and once I found it, I couldn't stop pulling. I am, by nature, a numbers person. For 30 years, I managed our finances with the kind of obsessive precision most people find slightly exhausting. Irregularities don't whisper to me. They scream. So I started digging. Quietly. Late at night, after Daniel and Nora were both asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with our entire financial history spread across my laptop screen like evidence at a crime scene, because, as it turned out, that's exactly what it was. I found small, recurring transfers, a few $100s at a time, siphoned out of our joint savings into an account I'd never seen. Labeled things like business expense or loan repayment. Boring labels. Designed to be boring. But they'd been happening twice a month for over a year. That's the moment the cold sickness set into my stomach and never fully left. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't one drunken mistake at a work conference. This was a plan. A patient, calculated, year-long plan. If you've ever had that exact feeling, that sick, sinking certainty right before you find the proof, drop a 1 in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one who's lived through that particular kind of dread. I hired a private investigator. Discreet. Recommended by a friend who'd needed one herself, years back, for reasons she never fully explained. The report came back in a plain manila envelope a week later, and it was worse than anything I'd let myself imagine. Photos of Daniel and Chloe holding hands outside a restaurant 2 towns over. Photos of them touring beachfront listings with a realtor in Florida, a state I'd never once heard either of them mention. Photos of her wearing a new diamond necklace. The exact necklace from that mountain town jewelry store. But the worst moment, the one that still visits me at 3 in the morning sometimes, came when Daniel left his phone unlocked on the nightstand one night while he showered. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't hold it steady enough to read. I knew I shouldn't look. I looked anyway. Their messages weren't just an affair. They were a countdown. They talked about our future. About the house on the beach. They mocked me, my routines, my spreadsheets, my boring obsession with our budget, as if the very thing that had kept our family financially afloat for 30 years was some kind of personality flaw to be laughed at behind my back. And then I found the message that changed everything. Daniel, to Chloe, sent just 1 week before the party. The party will be the perfect time. In front of everyone. She won't dare make a scene with her friends there. Clean break. Then we're finally free. Her reply, and she has no idea about the money? His answer, none. She trusts me completely. Always has. It's her one weakness. I sat there in the dark, the glow of his stolen phone lighting up my face, and something in my chest that used to be love simply curdled into something else entirely. Something colder. Something with edges. He called my trust a weakness. 30 years, and that's how he understood the thing I'd given him most freely. He was about to learn in a courtroom, in front of witnesses, with his name on every piece of paper, exactly how wrong he was. We're not even to the good part yet. If you want to hear what I found buried in my basement filing cabinet, the thing that flipped this entire situation upside down, stay with me, and comment your city one more time, so I know who's still here. The day after I read those messages, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a single plate. I went down to the basement, to an old metal filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in years, and I started pulling folders until my fingers found the one I needed. A document, signed exactly 1 week before our wedding. 30 years old. Back then, my family had real money, and Daniel had nothing but charm and ambition. He was the one who insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect you, Ellie, he'd said, all earnest eyes, though we both quietly understood it was really there to protect his future from my family's money if things ever went sideways. My father's lawyer told me not to sign it. I signed it anyway. I was 24 and in love, and love at 24 doesn't read fine print. My fingers, coated in a decade of dust, finally pulled that thick yellowed contract free. I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor and read every dense, dry paragraph like my life depended on it, because, as it turned out, it did. And there it was. Buried in the middle of the document, in language so standard his own cut-rate hometown lawyer probably didn't think twice about it, a fidelity clause. If either party could prove infidelity during the marriage, the wrong spouse would be entitled to 70% of all marital assets, retirement accounts, investments, real estate, all of it. The family home would go, in full, to the party who hadn't cheated. And unlike most of the document's other clauses, this one was written to remain in force for the entire duration of the marriage. No expiration date. No fine print escape hatch. He forgot. In all his careful, meticulous planning to blow up my life, he forgot the exact trap he'd built with his own hands 3 decades earlier. I called Sharon that same afternoon. We'd known each other since kindergarten, and she'd since become one of the most feared divorce attorneys in the entire state. I told her everything, the money, the messages, Chloe, the beach house, the prenup, my voice shaking so hard I could barely get the words out in order. There was a long, heavy silence on her end of the line. Then she said, low and even, good. It's time to burn it all down. For the next 2 months, Sharon and I became architects of his downfall, working in absolute silence, while Daniel strutted around planning a public humiliation he thought he'd already won. We subpoenaed records for the secret account and built a timeline so airtight it practically wrote itself. We got a sworn statement from the investigator. We documented every dinner, every piece of jewelry, every stolen dollar diverted from our daughter's future into his fantasy with my own stepsister. He thought he was playing chess. He didn't realize the board had already been flipped while his back was turned. The plan, once it came together, was simple and brutal in its precision. Sharon would file for divorce the morning of Nora's birthday party, the same morning, with an emergency motion attached to freeze every joint account, citing financial misconduct. Judges move fast on motions like that when the paper trail is this clean. It would be approved before Daniel even knew a filing existed. The envelope was the final piece. Inside it, a court-stamped copy of the divorce petition. Not a threat. A declaration already in motion that I was the one ending this on my terms, on my timeline, in front of everyone he'd tried to humiliate me in front of. That morning, before Nora was even awake, I drove to the courthouse alone. The air was sharp and cold, and I remember feeling something I hadn't felt in months, calm. Real calm. This wasn't revenge. It was survival. It was justice, plain and simple, for me and for my daughter. When I got home, Daniel was in the kitchen humming to himself, sticking candles into Nora's cake. He kissed my cheek. "Gonna be a perfect day, Ellie," he said. I looked him dead in the eye and smiled. "Yes," I said. "It is." He had no idea the papers dismantling his entire world were already stamped, filed, and moving through the system, sitting quietly in a plain cream envelope, waiting for him. If you're still with me, drop a like right now. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to hear it, and I want you here for what happens next, because this is where it gets dangerous. After I left that party, I didn't drive home. I couldn't. That house, the one that had felt like a sanctuary for 20 years, suddenly felt like a trap with his fingerprints all over it. I drove straight to Sharon's place, knuckles white on the wheel the entire way. Nora cried in her car seat, confused and scared by how fast everything had unraveled, until I promised her a special treat at Aunt Sharon's house. She finally settled, clutching her balloon dinosaur like a life preserver. Sharon was already waiting on her porch when I pulled in. She wrapped me in a hug so fierce it nearly knocked the wind out of me, then took my sleeping daughter from my arms and carried her inside without a word. When she came back, she handed me a glass of wine and asked, gently, "How are you?" "I don't know what I am," I told her honestly. "But I'm not broken." We sat in near silence for maybe 20 minutes. Then we heard it, tires screeching into her driveway, a car door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. We both knew exactly who it was. The doorbell rang. Not once, a long, frantic series of jabs, like someone trying to punch through the door itself. Sharon just raised one eyebrow at me. "Shall we?" I nodded, and she opened the door to Daniel storming in, face flushed a deep, furious red, hair wrecked from clearly running his hands through it over and over on the drive. In his fist, the crumpled, torn cream envelope. Behind him, Chloe trailed in looking pale and suddenly very unsure of herself. "What is the meaning of this?" he shouted, shaking the papers at me. His voice cracked, actually cracked, with a kind of panic I had genuinely never heard from him in 30 years. "A divorce? You're filing today? You froze our accounts today." I stayed seated. I took a slow sip of wine. "I thought it was fitting," I said, my voice completely level. "You wanted to start a new life today. I'm just helping with the paperwork." "This is insane. You can't do this." "You chose to burn it down," I said quietly. "All that's left is dividing the ashes." He let out this short, ugly laugh, still clinging to his own arrogance like a life raft. "Don't be ridiculous. Any lawyer will tell you that prenup expired years ago. It's worthless." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I let myself smile, small and cold. "Actually, it isn't. You should have read it more carefully, Daniel. Or hired a better lawyer 30 years ago. Section 12. The Fidelity Clause. Still very much in effect. Sharon can walk you through the specifics if you're having trouble following." I watched every drop of color drain out of his face. His eyes darted from me to Sharon, who leaned in the doorway with her arms crossed, thoroughly unbothered. The smug certainty that had been holding his whole posture up simply collapsed. He seemed to physically shrink in front of me. The house. The Florida property. His half of our retirement funds. His entire imaginary future with Chloe funded, every cent of it, by money that would now legally belong to me, was turning to dust in real time. He dropped into Sharon's armchair, papers sliding out of his hand. "Ellie, you can't," he whispered. 30 years. "You can't do this to me." "I'm not doing anything to you," I said, and I meant every word. "This is all your own handiwork. You just never bothered to read the fine print." I genuinely thought that was the worst of it. I thought watching him fall apart in that living room would be the end of the fight. I was catastrophically wrong, and what happened next still makes my hands shake when I talk about it. Comment 1 if you want me to keep going, because it's about to get a lot darker. By the next morning, the smear campaign had already begun. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing calls from relatives, from friends who'd been standing right there at that party. And the story circulating wasn't the truth. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Daniel and Chloe had apparently spent the entire night on the phone, painting me as a jealous, unstable woman who'd secretly been planning some kind of vindictive meltdown for months, driven by what they were calling a midlife crisis. My own aunt called, voice thick with pity, to tell me Daniel was worried about my mental state. Friends I'd known for 20+ years suddenly went cold and distant, suspicion creeping into their voices whenever I tried to explain my side. It was humiliating. It was isolating. And it was absolutely nothing compared to what came next. 2 days later, I was in the kitchen with Nora, making pancakes, her favorite batter smeared across her nose, both of us laughing. For a couple of hours, life almost felt normal again. Then the doorbell rang. I opened it to a stern woman in a gray pantsuit holding up a badge. "My name is Carol Finney," she said, flat and official. "I'm an investigator with Child Protective Services. May I come in?" My stomach dropped through the floor. The spatula slipped right out of my hand and clattered against the tile. CPS. None of it made sense. "We received an anonymous report expressing concern for your daughter's welfare," she said, eyes already scanning the hallway behind me. Allegations of neglect and an unstable home environment related to the mother's erratic behavior. Erratic behavior. The exact language Daniel and Chloe had been feeding to everyone we knew. My knees nearly buckled. This was them. This had to be them. They weren't just trying to destroy my reputation anymore. They were trying to take my daughter. For 2 of the longest hours of my life, that investigator moved through my home. She opened my refrigerator. She checked my cupboards. She went through Nora's bedroom, her toys, her clothes. She asked me questions that made my skin crawl. Do you drink around the child? Has she ever witnessed emotional outbursts? Has she ever been left unsupervised? Then she interviewed my 4-year-old. Alone. Behind a closed door. They made me sit in the living room while a total stranger questioned my daughter about her home, and I have never in my life experienced 30 minutes that felt longer. I sat there with my fists clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms, running through every horror story I'd ever heard about children pulled from perfectly good homes on false reports. Daniel knew exactly what he was doing. He knew Nora was my entire world. He knew that threatening my custody of her was the single most effective way to break something in me that money never could. When Ms. Finney finally emerged, her face gave nothing away. "I'll be filing my report," she said, sliding a card with a case number across the counter. "There will be unannounced follow-up visits." I shut the door behind her and slid down against it, my whole body trembling. The financial betrayal, I could survive. The lies to our friends, I could survive. But this, weaponizing an innocent 4-year-old in their custody war, this was a line I never imagined either of them capable of crossing. The cold resolve I'd been running on shattered, and in its place came something white-hot and entirely new. This wasn't a divorce anymore. This was a war, and I would burn my entire life down before I let them take my daughter. Comment your city one more time. I want to see how far this story has traveled by the time we get to the courtroom, because what Sharon found next is the kind of twist you genuinely can't script. The second that CPS car pulled out of my driveway, I called Sharon. I could barely get words out through the sobbing. "They're trying to take her," I choked. "They called CPS on me, Sharon." Her voice, usually razor-sharp and lawyerly, dropped into something colder than I'd ever heard from her. "Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming." 20 minutes later, she found me sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at nothing. She didn't say a word. She just knelt down and held me while I finally let myself fall apart completely for the first time since this entire nightmare started. Then she pulled me back up onto my feet. "Okay," she said, snapping back into lawyer mode. "This isn't defense anymore. This is annihilation. They want to fight dirty? Fine. I'll show them what dirty actually looks like." Her office became our war room for the rest of that week. Every phone call, every document, every hour was aimed at one target, proving those allegations were fabricated from nothing. We called Nora's pediatrician, who wrote a glowing letter about her health and my attentiveness at every single visit. We called her preschool teacher, a warm, sharp woman who was so horrified by the accusation that she wrote a 2-page statement detailing my volunteer hours, my daily involvement, and rallied 3 other parents to send supporting letters of their own. Neighbors on both sides of my house wrote signed statements swearing they'd never seen anything but a stable, loving home. Within 48 hours, we had a mountain of testimony, all saying the exact same thing. But Sharon wasn't satisfied with defense. "Proving you're a good mother is the floor," she told me, pacing her office like a caged animal. "I want to prove who made that call. I want it hanging around their necks in front of a judge." She filed an emergency motion demanding the phone records tied to the anonymous tip line, arguing it wasn't a good faith report, but a calculated act of perjury meant to manipulate custody. The judge, staring at the pile of support letters we'd already submitted, granted it without hesitation. The phone records came back a week later. The call had come from a prepaid burner, purchased with cash, at a convenience store across town. A dead end. For one gutting moment, my hope actually cracked. Sharon wasn't finished, though. "They're not as smart as they think," she said, eyes lighting up with something almost predatory. "Criminals are always stupid, Ellie. Every single time." She sent her own investigator, an ex-cop with a talent for digital forensics, to pull the store's security footage from that exact date and time. And there she was. Crystal clear on the grainy video, Chloe, in a bright maternity top, standing at the counter. She paid cash for the burner. But right before that, she'd grabbed a magazine and a soda and paid for those with her personal credit card. The timestamp on that card transaction matched the security footage down to the second. We had her. Undeniable. Irrefutable. Sharon printed a high-resolution still and slid it across her desk toward me. Chloe, staring almost directly into the camera, sliding a burner phone into her purse with a look on her face I can only describe as smug. "This," Sharon said, tapping the photo once, "is the nail in their coffin. We're close to the end now, and I promise you, the courtroom scene is worth every minute you've spent with me. If this is hitting you, hit like right now, it truly does help, and let's finish this together." The morning of our final hearing, the courtroom air felt thick enough to chew. Cheap paneling, harsh fluorescent lighting, that particular hush that only exists in rooms where someone's entire life is about to be decided by a stranger in a robe. I sat beside Sharon, spine straight, hands locked together in my lap. Across the aisle, Daniel sat with a lawyer who looked barely old enough to shave, visibly out of his depth. Daniel himself looked wrecked, thinner, hollow-eyed, like a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Chloe sat behind him in the gallery, her pregnant belly impossible to miss under her dress. She never once looked at me. The judge, an older woman named Judge Marcia Fields with the kind of eyes that seemed to see straight through people, didn't waste time on pleasantries. She went through the financial discovery first, page after page of statements, credit card records, property assessments. "Mister," she said, peering over her glasses at Daniel, "it appears there has been a systematic, deliberate effort to divert marital funds into a private account. Explain this to me." His young lawyer stammered something about misunderstood business expenses. The judge was distinctly unimpressed. She turned to the prenup next. "I've reviewed this agreement, which was, I'll note, insisted upon by Mr. Vance himself. It is airtight. Section 12 is unambiguous." She looked directly at him. "You made a choice, sir. Choices have consequences." Her ruling on the assets was swift and merciless. "The family home, mine. My retirement accounts, built up over decades, entirely mine. 70% of joint investments and savings, mine, exactly as the prenup demanded. And before the remaining 30% was even divided, Daniel would first have to reimburse the marital estate for every single dollar he'd secretly siphoned away, plus legal fees. When it was all totaled up, he was left holding a failing business and a mountain of debt." I felt something settle in my chest, quiet, grim, satisfying. But Sharon wasn't done. "Your Honor," she said, standing, "there's one more matter." His lawyer immediately tried to pivot into custody arguments, but Sharon raised a hand and cut him off cold. "Before we discuss custody, the court needs to understand a malicious and unlawful attempt to interfere with that very process." She walked the CPS file up to the clerk. The official closed report marked unfounded. The stack of support letters. And then, on the projector for the entire courtroom to see, the security still from that convenience store, Chloe's face frozen mid-smirk, burner phone halfway into her purse. "And here," Sharon said, voice like ice, "is the credit card receipt, time-stamped to the exact second." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Daniel stared at the screen like it was something out of a nightmare. Chloe looked like she might actually be sick. Judge Fields' expression hardened into something I can only describe as controlled fury. She stared at Chloe for a long, silent moment. "Did you make this call?" she asked, voice low and dangerous. Chloe could only nod, tears sliding down her face. "Let me be perfectly clear," the judge said, her voice now filling the entire room. "Weaponizing child protective services in the middle of a divorce is one of the most reprehensible acts I have witnessed in this courtroom in 20 years on the bench. You did not just waste the resources of a critical public agency. You terrorized a good mother, and you used an innocent 4-year-old as a pawn." She turned to Daniel. "And your complicity in this, your role in orchestrating it, is noted, and it speaks volumes about your character." She awarded me full legal and physical custody of Nora on the spot, with Daniel granted only supervised visitation pending a full psychological evaluation. She then instructed the bailiff to forward the full evidence file to the district attorney, with her personal recommendation that Chloe be prosecuted for filing a false report. As we walked out of that courtroom, Daniel caught up to me in the hallway, looking utterly hollowed out. "Ellie, please," he whispered. "I made a terrible mistake. Is there any chance?" I looked at the man I had shared 30 years with, searching his face for even a flicker of real remorse. I found none. Only self-pity. "No, Daniel," I said, gentle but absolutely final. "That door is closed. Goodbye." I didn't look back. Not once. I left him standing in that hallway with the wreckage of the life he'd so carelessly detonated. One more thing before we get to where I am now. Comment 1 if you're still here, because you've made it through the whole story, and honestly, that means something to me. 6 months have passed since that day in court. The leaves outside my window have gone gold and crimson, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I actually feel like I can breathe. Life is quieter now. Simpler. And completely, entirely my own. I repainted every room in that house. New furniture. New photos, just Nora and me, laughing everywhere. The ghosts of his betrayal have been evicted for good. It's our sanctuary now, not a museum of what he did to us. And my old dream, the one I shelved for 3 decades, finally became real. I opened my own practice. Not some glossy downtown office with a skyline view. A small, sunlit space a few blocks from Nora's school. I help women navigate the financial wreckage of major life upheavals, divorce, widowhood, sudden career loss. My first clients found me through mom groups, through friends of friends who'd heard whispers of my story. They walk in scared and overwhelmed, holding finances some man had controlled for them their entire adult lives, and I teach them the language of money. I hand them back their own power, one spreadsheet at a time. There is a kind of fulfillment in that work I never once found in 30 years of corporate life. My pain turned into my purpose, and I don't say that lightly. As for Daniel, I still hear things, occasionally, through the wreckage of our old social circle, which scattered completely once the CPS story got out. He lost most of his clients. His business is on life support. He and Chloe are renting a small apartment across town now. The DA did press charges. Chloe received 2 years of probation and a significant fine. Their fairy tale beginning turned into a cautionary tale nobody wanted to be the moral of. I take no joy in his downfall. But I feel no pity for him either. He built every inch of this himself. Nora is the center of my entire world now. That custody fight terrified me down to my bones, but it also forged something between us that I don't think anything could ever break. We hike on weekends. We bake terrible, lopsided cookies in our bright new kitchen. We read stacks of library books until she falls asleep mid-sentence. A few nights ago, tucking her in, she wrapped her little arms around my neck and whispered, "I love our house, Mommy. It's so happy now." I had to leave the room so she wouldn't see me cry. That was all the validation I will ever need. This entire fight was never about revenge, no matter how satisfying certain parts of it felt. It was about building a safe, happy home for my daughter. It was about showing her, at 4 years old, exactly what a strong, unshakable woman looks like when everything is stacked against her. That envelope I handed him at her birthday party felt, in the moment, like the absolute end of my world. I understand now that it wasn't an ending at all. It was a key. And it unlocked a door to a life I genuinely didn't know was still possible for me, a life where I'm not just somebody's wife, not just somebody's mother, but the architect of my own future. In protecting my daughter and my future, I found something I'd quietly lost 30 years ago, without even noticing it was gone. Myself. And that, to me, will always be a victory worth fighting for. Thank you so much for staying with me through this whole story. It genuinely means the world to me that you're here. If this resonated with you even a little, I want to know, what's one piece of advice you'd give someone who just found out they were betrayed by people they trusted most? Drop it in the comments below. And if you haven't already, hit that like button and subscribe. There are more stories coming, and I want you here for them. You are not alone. Not in this, and not in whatever you're carrying right now.